the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. My name is Philip Boone, and I use he, him, his pronouns.
And I'm Caitlin Drake. I use female pronouns, she, her, hers.
Before we begin, I'd like to state that the views represented in this podcast are those of the individuals in this conversation and not the official position of Boston Avenue United Methodist Church. We are recording this podcast remotely from our individual workspaces during the COVID-19 pandemic as we practice physical distancing as a church community. Contemporary worship. Do you love it, hate it, have questions about it? Today, our guests are Reverend Sara Montgomery and Reverend Jen Logsdon-Kellogg to deep dive into contemporary worship with us. Welcome, everyone.
Good morning. This is Jen. My pronouns are she, her, hers.
And this is Sara. My pronouns are also she, her, hers.
Welcome. So just to set a little bit of parameter for the conversation, when we talk about contemporary worship, often kind of parallel to traditional worship, what does that mean? What does that look like?
Well, traditional worship would be what some people might call high church, a little more liturgical, probably more hymn-oriented, and organ music in the case of our church, and a lot of United Methodist churches will have organ music and choir. So the music is more formal, and the liturgy is often more formal. And often the pastors are robed, the choir is robed, and the people often dress more formally, although that's not necessarily true. In contemporary worship, there are lots of different styles of contemporary worship, and so I would say that contemporary worship is very contextual, and it is something that is in contrast to the traditional worship service in a particular denomination or congregation. So I have been a part of contemporary worship in communities that have very different atmospheres. But the common denominator would be that the dress is usually more casual. The music is more, even if hymns are used, they would be not played on organ. They would be played on maybe an electric piano and guitars and drums. And the arrangements might be a little bit more modern. And then often the music is not hymns at all, but music that is written specifically for Christian worship in the case of a Christian contemporary service, and sometimes even secular music. And often the liturgy, I've been in contemporary worship services where the liturgy was actually fairly formal. Often the same elements of worship are included in a contemporary service as are in the traditional service, but the style is different. So the affirmation of faith, for example, might be not the Apostles' Creed, but something that is phrased in more modern language and things like that. Also in Boston Avenue United Methodist Church and in a lot of the Methodist churches that I've been in, a traditional service would not have screens as a major part of the service, so video screens, and would use a paper bulletin and a hymnal for the worshipers to follow along. Where in a contemporary service, or sometimes it's called a modern service, the screen would be the way that the words of the songs are shown, and then pictures and video would be used in the sermon and all of those kinds of things. So those are the major differences.
Sara, when you arrived at Boston Avenue UMC, was there a contemporary worship service already?
No, there wasn't. When I got here about a little over 4 years ago now, we did not have a contemporary worship offering. So there was a Vesper service that was kind of happening maybe once a month, every once in a while, but nothing that was a contemporary style in the morning time as a part of Boston Avenue, as a part of our worship offerings. And one of the pieces that we kind of thought around that then was being downtown and in the space of, kind of a downtown metropolitan community. We really wanted to offer up a different style of worship on Sundays or to folks as well. So we kind of played around with the day and the time that was going to happen. Kind of our long approach and look was, we started for once a month, just being able to bring the opportunity to folks so that they could see a little bit more about kind of what Jen had already talked about, some of the differences that would happen within a contemporary worship style. And so we started once a month and actually did that on Sundays. And then we also did that on Sunday evenings. And then we tried a couple of times thinking about Saturdays and kind of thinking about some folks that maybe couldn't get into worship on Sundays. And so wanted to kind of offer that up. But eventually we ended up landing on the Sunday morning time frame, kind of thinking about wanting to wrap around the educational pieces as well. There's such a great educational program here at Boston Avenue that we realized that if we were doing the worship service on a Sunday evening or a Saturday night or really any other time, we would potentially be needing to build a whole educational component around that. And we really just wanted to integrate this worship into the already existing parts of the church. And so we came to Sunday morning, and we've been doing that for about 2 years now, 2 or 3 years. And then because of the pandemic, we now get to go every Sunday morning. And so that wasn't happening until the pandemic started. We had moved into 2 times a month and sort of continuing to build that worshiping group. It's been really interesting to talk to folks who were, lifelong Boston Avenue members. And some folks, they said, when they left here to be able to go to college, they didn't realize that people had worship in different ways because all they had known was the one style that was in the main sanctuary their whole life. And so kind of having this opportunity really just invites and opens people up to the fact that people connect to God in many different ways. And so we wanted to be able to have another opportunity for folks to be able to connect to God. So that's kind of why we decided to be able to have that here at Boston Avenue, was just to open up a space where more folks could connect to God within the ways that they might connect, which might be a little different than our traditional style worship.
So what are some key components our contemporary worship service? I know Jen kind of gave that overarching perspective, but for contemporary worship at Boston Avenue, what does that look like?
Yeah, this is Sara again. There's, for us, it includes a band. And so in our traditional worship, there's not drums and an electric guitar and a bass guitar and, all of that happening all at the same time. And then the other piece that we really wanted to, that's kind of a big difference in style that we wanted to really incorporate in was this ability to, as Jen and I have kind of been talking about it, it's this ability to wiggle. So for a lot of folks, when you come to traditional church, you really kind of stay in your seat and you don't move around a ton because it's, there's, for a lot of folks, it's a very reflective piece for a lot of people. And so the noise distracts. And so Jen and I wanted to create an environment where that ability to move around and to dance and to sing and to get up and walk around, or, sometimes like Philip and I's kids are sometimes in the back just sort of dancing in the background, or they're running around the space. We wanted to be able to encourage all ways that people would also be moving in the midst of worship. And so that way it's not restrictive, but it is different. And so for some folks that's distracting. And so that's a hard place for them to be able to worship. And so we always, tell them about the sanctuary worship then, where there's a little less movement unless it's all a communal movement. And so that was one of the pieces that we really wanted to incorporate in. We also really wanted to incorporate in some children's activities. So we have a children's time where the kids come up to the front. We have activities that they're able to do at their tables and kind of be able to worship together as a full family and really engage in the worship in that kind of a different way. And so that's all shifted a little bit in our online only version. But those are kind of some of the things that we were able to incorporate into to bring something that was a little bit different than what happens in the sanctuary.
This is Jen. I want to tag on to what Sara said and say that a couple of the other things that we do differently in 13th Street worship than in the sanctuary service. We take communion every week in 13th Street. In the sanctuary, they do formal communion once a month, and we do communion in a more informal way, but we decided that it is a central component of our worship service that we wanted to do every week, partly because it is participatory. Communion is a way of engaging our whole bodies in worship and reinforcing the communal nature of worship. And then when I came, I've been here a little over a year, and so when I came and started 13th Street, I started preaching at 13th Street Worship while Sara was out on maternity leave, and I began offering anointing as a part of communion for anyone that wanted anointing and prayer. And that's one of the things that I'm missing about our dispersed worship right now, is that we're not able to do that.
I appreciate having a worship place, a worship service that a rambunctious 4-year-old can run around in the back. It's personally, I've always preferred more traditional, but it's nice to have. But I also want my 4-year-old to be a part of worshiping with me. And in the sanctuary service, it's not quite as easy for them to do that. So it's nice to have a place where they can just run around and really not bothering anybody and dancing together. And it's nice to have that place for children who need to get the wiggles out. So
that's right. And that's the beauty of being at a big church, is that you can have those options, so even for you, Philip, like if your kids are at home because they're sick, you might prefer to go over to sanctuary worship and people worship there on that Sunday. That when your family's back together, y'all might prefer to be over at 13th Street. So kind of being able to give those options and those opportunities, it's a great way of really opening up people's spiritual life so that they, are able to choose and to be in either space at either time. And we have a lot of folks that will come to 9 o'clock to sanctuary worship, and then we'll come over and be a part of our worship as well at 11. So it's great to be able to have those choices when we think about worshiping God together.
And that's what I was doing for a while there. I was going to the 9 o'clock traditional service and then the 11 o'clock 13th Street. And you both preach and help lead 13th Street worship service. And you're both really passionate about this particular part of your job. Why do you like being a part of a contemporary worship service?
I love worship regardless. I am really passionate about worship and whatever helps people connect to God. And so my tradition, when I was growing up, I grew up in a church that had a traditional worship service. And my parents were in the choir, and I loved a traditional service. And kind of like some of our Boston Avenue youth have identified, that's really all I knew, except for camp and when I'd go visit other people at their churches. But I have come to love contemporary worship because it is more informal. I get to interact more with the congregation, and I'm able to be more loose kind of in my preaching style and do a lot more back and forth and experiment, which is a big thing for me. I love to, rather than stand up and do the talking head sermon for 25 or 30 minutes every Sunday, although I can do that and love to do it, which is what you usually get in traditional worship. I also love to experiment with maybe interviewing a parishioner for the sermon and getting a chance for lay people to give their own testimony to how God has worked in their lives, or to engage the congregation in maybe watching a video or some other outside resource and then reflecting on it together. So that, I think, is the biggest reason that contemporary worship is exciting for me, is because of the flexibility that we have to experiment and to find out what engages people and to have an interaction that is back and forth in worship rather than a one-way communication.
Yeah, this is Sara. I completely echo everything Jen said. I'm a kinesthetic learner, so I learn a lot by doing. And so with contemporary worship, it's been great to be able to have a way to engage within the text and to engage with the scripture and to participate in communion each week and be able to sing song, to be able to really engage in a little bit of a different way. Nice thing about being a preacher and kind of leading things is that even when I'm in a traditional worship, I'm still engaging because I'm the one who's kind of kinesthetically going through a lot of different motions and actions but it's just a great opportunity where your creativity and different things that can happen, which may be a little harder to do in more traditional setting, that a lot of folks that come to contemporary worships are open to a lot more of just kind of different ways of engaging with scripture. And so it's, so like Jen said, we've had, times when, like one time we had folks be able to write a prayer concern on a Lego, and then they built a prayer wall together. So with their Legos, or they used Play-Doh and created what God was calling them to do with the Play-Doh, or they were able to, I did once a joy balloon where people wrote their joys on the balloons and then they blew them up, and then we just hit them around the gym. And then you would stop and you would grab your balloon and pray the joy that was on that balloon. And then you'd hit the ball, balloons again everywhere. And so it's, just kind of those different ways of being able to experience God within a time of worship, and being a little bit more bodily interactive within that. That's what I love about contemporary settings.
So in my experience, there are people who love contemporary worship, and there are people who don't. For the people who love contemporary worship, what is it that you hear as pastors that makes it an important part of their faith life?
This is Sara. My husband grew up in a different faith background. So he grew up Baptist, and he is more inclined towards a contemporary worship setting. And what he really loves within that setting is the music, and being able to hear the music on Sunday mornings and then turn on his radio in the car during the week, and to hear the same music that he's singing on Sunday mornings be a part of his everyday life. He can take the dog on a walk and listen to praise and worship music. And so for him, it's a way to connect what he does on Sunday mornings with the rest of his week. And so that's really something that he loves. If there was a station and a radio station that was playing all hymns all the time, like he might be able to get the same sort of connection with a traditional setting, but that's not out there. And so he really loves that kind of connectivity, so that Sunday is not just this one thing that happens, but rather a way that really helps frame his whole week. And so, that's something I hear from a lot of folks is the way that the contemporary worship for them has been a part of engaging throughout the whole week.
This is Jen. Something else I hear from folks who prefer contemporary worship is that they find the setting less intimidating. So our contemporary worship service was, when we were able to meet in person, was happening in the gym in Jubilee Hall. And it's a much less formal space than our sanctuary. And of course, the style of language and the style of dress and all of those things are also much less formal. And for folks who didn't necessarily grow up with a traditional experience, or maybe who grew up with a traditional experience and have chosen something different as adults, the traditional worship space is usually lots of stained glass and nice furniture or pews and organ or other big fancy instruments, and it's meant to be a space that is big and awe-inspiring, and to make you feel like you've entered a different realm than your everyday week. And so people who are seeking out a traditional service are probably looking for something that feels a lot different than what it feels like at home or at work or any other place they go. Where people who are drawn to contemporary worship service like that, the contemporary service feels casual and much like it would at home or in, their everyday life.
It feels like for a church to start a whole new worship service is quite a lot to take on, to build a new worship service. For any churches who may not have a contemporary worship service right now, why would you say is it valuable for a church to offer this type of worship?
Well, this is Sara. I think in particular, if you're a progressive church, being able to offer up a contemporary style of service within a progressive theology is a very unique combination. So a lot of times, many of our kind of contemporary services that most folks think about and kind of see and know a little bit more about are usually also aligned with some more conservative theology. And so being able to be at a church that was incredibly open within their theological beliefs, having this opportunity that of folks who are going to be drawn here to that openness. And so offering up that piece of another space of openness as well then. So a space an opportunity for a choice within the style, but that it's Boston Avenue is unique within their progressive nature of the congregation and of the theology. And so that was a great thing to be able to offer up within this space. I think it's also just a wonderful, Jen is our kind of really has done a wonderful job of looking at evangelism in terms of not just thinking about like, how do we welcome in folks that are here, but how are we reaching out to people that aren't here at all? And I've loved what she's been able to really teach me this year about being able to take these experiences and opportunities of worship outside of our spaces as well. And I think that a contemporary style leans itself towards that a little bit more. We've been able to do some things outside in the park, which is a lot harder to pull out an organ into the, into the parking lot than it is to have a piano and a guitar. And when we do that, we not only reach folks that have been coming, but we also reach some folks that are living outside, or we reach some folks who might be driving by or walking by and want to participate. And so I've loved how Jen's really been helping me rethink about, how do we take things, not just think about how do we welcome folks once they're here? So how is it something that's attractional, but really how is it something that's missional as well? And I think that's a great thing for churches to think about is how can a contemporary service be a missional piece, something that is going out of your spaces and able to meet people where they are within that.
This is Jen, and I also want to add that for me, the new services that I have started have much of what we've decided to do has revolved around what are the gifts of the people who are part of the team who is doing the work, right? So I have been in church. The first church I served we had a traditional service, but our musician was writing her own contemporary music. And so we moved to a blended service and included both hymns and music that was written specifically for that congregation that was contemporary. And then I think with Boston Avenue has a very strong music program that, the traditional worship has given people who are interested in choir and in instrumental music a place to show their gifts and use their gifts to help other people encounter God. So with contemporary worship, it's the same idea. We've got people in our congregation who are gifted musicians who want to lead people in connecting with God and are able. It's really great to watch a team come together and develop their gifts in community in such a way that they're being nourished spiritually, but they're also providing an environment where other people can be nourished. So I would say that whatever kind of service your church already has, you can either adapt based on who's coming and what gifts are present, or you can launch new things, spin off new services based on who's coming.
I think that there are a lot of good parts to having a contemporary service. You all have certainly made a case for a church having that. But what are some of the obstacles that have emerged both over the course of creating this worship service, Sara, and then once Jen joined and kind of was thrown into the mix of our 13th Street worship? What are some obstacles that you experienced or that other churches might also experience?
Well, I think this is Sara, and one of the obstacles that Jen has already mentioned that's also a benefit, but is also an obstacle in a way, is the space. We worship in a gym, which is a benefit in that it does create that more casual style. and, kind of helps and invite different folks in. But we also worship in a gym, which is not the best acoustic setting. So it can be you can lose a lot of the music. You can lose a lot of what is happening within a very large space that doesn't have as much of that ability to really kind of pull things in a powerful way. So that's definitely an obstacle within there. And then it's always an obstacle to change and to do something new. So, even with Jen coming on during this year, it's, she brought in a ton of phenomenal and wonderful gifts, but it's always hard to be able to shift around a team and to change within that. So it's, it took Jen and I a little bit of time to be able to kind of, figure each other out and kind of see, okay, how can we actually do this together? Rather than it being just, oh, Jen preaches this time, so this is the one she's leading, and I'm preaching this time, and so this is the one I'm leading. But really, how can we be that part of a team? And I think that's, for me, one of the really big, obstacles, but also benefits of a contemporary worship. Just as Jen had mentioned before, that, when I'm leading worship, I want to have a team around me. And so that, so there's going to be a lot more lay involvement, which also means there might be some more mistakes because it's perhaps using people that aren't here all week long and so aren't being paid to be able to do this. And so I think just, being creative within that and inviting folks to be a part of that and to join it, knowing how to invite folks, knowing who to invite, kind of the obstacle of learning, like, when we were first starting, we had to figure out, because it's, there wasn't a contemporary worship band. So we had to figure out, well, who actually knows how to play the guitar in this church, and who actually knows how to play bass drums, or the bass guitar. And so I think kind of it is hard to start anything new. But there is a ton of benefits to having a lot of lay leadership within that new thing as well, which will also come up with challenges. So it's kind of it's a beautiful thing. And when you get that team together, then there's just so much beauty around the ownership that a whole group has together then within that. But it's, as everything is, there are always obstacles to things that are fun and things that are creative.
Both of you had laid out some plans to really shift how 13th Street worship might look this year. Then COVID-19 happened, and a lot of the plans had to be scrapped, and a lot of changes had to be made. What were the hardest changes to make from what you were planning to do in February to March, whenever COVID-19 happened?
Well, let me start by saying that we had come up with a whole new way to do our scheduling starting January 1st. And we had, as Sara mentioned, when I arrived, we were worshiping twice a month. And during the time that she was out on maternity leave, I started campaigning to move our service to every week. And we designed a different kind of very, very, very low-key casual worship service for the alternating Sundays. And so that pattern we started the beginning of January, where we were every other Sunday regular contemporary worship, and then every other Sunday this really small group with testimony time and things like that. So we were just barely getting used to that when COVID happened. And I think this was difficult, but also brilliant on our part, and I don't think I can take credit for it. When COVID happened, we met late in the week on the weekend of March 15th. So March 15th was the Sunday, and we decided to close our facilities like on Friday. So we had 2 days to figure out what we were going to do for worship on Sunday. And Sara and I could have said, you know what, we have a traditional worship service at Boston Avenue that is already televised, it is already live streamed, it is available, people will be able to find it, people will be able to worship. And we could have thrown our hands up and said, 13th Street will just have to take a break. But instead, we decided that this was our chance to take worship to a weekly schedule. and to deal with the problem of our space. We were already live streaming our service on Facebook, but because we were in the gym and because we just had one static camera, which was actually just an iPad, we did not have a very visually or audioly, orally,
auditory
pleasing worship service. It was great if you were a member of 13th Street and you were going to miss church, so you at least didn't miss what was happening, but it wasn't something that anybody would, seek out just to watch online. So we moved our worship space into a smaller room to take advantage of the better acoustics. And we decided that instead of that we would create a backdrop, and we kind of brainstormed this, what we call our Fun with Flags setup. And so we have a completely different environment that we are leading worship in. And then after we had done that for a few weeks, we were still taking turns preaching. We were both leading in the service and alternating prayers and leading communion and those things. But we decided for Easter to preach together and have our sermon be a conversation between the two of us. It was a one-time experiment. I really think we were trying to be good teammates and not say, I get Easter and you don't. And it turned out to work out so well that we have adopted that as our preaching style throughout COVID. Now, as far as participation with our lay people, one thing we decided was, this is Jen still, one thing we decided was really important for 13th Street and the values that we hold as 13th Street was for our lay people to be able to continue to participate in leading worship. And because everyone was socially distant, we then, I'm going to ask Sara to answer this, how she is coordinating our lay people to send their videos in and let them be a part of worship.
Yeah, there's, so folks have been a part of bringing our music together. So again, this has been something that has been adapting since we began. So the first couple of times we just had a couple of musicians come in, about 2, so that we could keep everybody safe. And we were able to just record here and then just insert those videos. But then we started to realize that wasn't really inviting a lot of people to be able to use their gifts. And so we started to be able to invite certain different groups of people to record the music at their homes, and then to be able to insert that within our worship. And now we've kind of been able to grow and adapt. Blair Hines is another wonderful adapter that has been working with us, and she's able to merge different videos from different spaces. And so we can have 5 people contributing to one song. And so being able to we have to know like which musician is going to be the main one to set the pace and that everybody's going to follow. And then after you have that main musician do their piece, then you just listen in with your ear pods, and you're able to have that first main video lead the rest of the group. And so you'll be able to see that a part of our worship now has musical compilations that, have up to 5 or 6 folks that are able to be a part of leading us in worship. We've also been having a lot of fun with our children's time videos, or different opportunities during that time. We were able to show the confirmands this past Sunday and kind of be able to celebrate them and sort of have a video that usually we wouldn't have been able to have seen all the confirmands. And so to really be able to be together in that, we've been able to have different videos of being able to see the blessing. We're going to show a blessing of the animals videos, or we were able to show a blessing of the face masks videos, and just different kinds of things, which has really led towards the worship being engaging in a different way. We've also had a lot of our congregation and a lot of our lay folks then have been able to be a part of those videos. So if you're not musically inclined, then you can still be a part of leading worship, because you can send in a video and have that be the part that you're able to be that you're able to participate in. And so it's actually been really fun. I know that I probably shouldn't talk about a global health pandemic as being a really fun time, but it's been really fun to get so creative and to be able to think so much outside of the box. You know, usually we've never been able to have, for instance, Eva Marie be a part of a children's time moment because she's usually engaged in something else in the building. But we've been able to have her do a children's time 2 or 3 times. And that's her gift. I mean, it's wonderful. And so it's just been a truly unique experience. And I think one of the other really great blessings of then having a much better digital presence with 13th Street is that we've been able to reach people that aren't in Tulsa. And so, I mean, my mom watches, which, let's just be honest, my mom's just watching because she's my mom. But, you know, we also have other folks that watch. I mean, I know Jen's told me before, we have some folks that watch from Texas. I've had some of my other friends that have said, oh, I always tune into y'all after we tune into our own church worship. And so they're able to engage with those different voices within worship leading. And so I think it's just been a wonderful opportunity of really being able to expand out our reach as well. And so that way it's not just thinking about just Tulsa, but kind of, you know, as John Wesley would often say, you know, the world is my parish, and kind of looking at that bigger concept of who all are we able to reach. And so then as Jen and I are preaching together, we're really thinking locally as well as globally. So how do these things connect to our local context, but then also how do they connect to a much larger setting? So it's been really, I keep on saying it's been fun, but it really has been like super fun to be able to do this in such a different and unique way.
If someone is interested in being a part of 13th Street Worship or the 13th Street Worship community, what would you recommend they do?
We have a Facebook page, and that is a great way to find our community. People can call the church and call either Reverend Sara Pugh Montgomery or Reverend Jen Logsdon-Kellogg and get to us that way. You can email us. You can find our contact information on both the church website, which is bostonavenue.org, or on our Facebook page. If you go to our Facebook page, then you can see our worship videos. You can see extra videos that we've put in. Reverend Sara does a prayer meditation in the middle of the week every week, and we'll put up videos about what's going on in missions and what's going on with our children. And you can message us there too from the Facebook page. We have a priority, we say in our worshiping community, is that we encourage and invite people who are wrestling with their concept of God, with their understanding of their faith, with how they feel about the Bible and Jesus and prayer and all of those things. And we encourage full participation in whatever way is comfortable for folks. We really want to be a place where people who are rethinking or maybe, you know, deconstructing and reconstructing what they believe can find a safe place to ask questions and explore their faith. And so Reverend Sara and I are both committed to that. So if anyone is ready to join 13th Street Worship as a member of a United Methodist Church, we certainly welcome that. But we also welcome people who are just in an exploratory place. So that's traditionally, well, this is true for Methodism in general. If you are already a part of a United Methodist Church, it's just a matter of transferring your membership from one church to another. If you've already been baptized in another Christian tradition, even if it's been a long time, even if you've been out of the church for years and years and years, you don't get rebaptized. You just reaffirm your faith. But then if you've never been baptized, then we will baptize you when you're ready.
And if you're also somebody, this is Sara, if you're also somebody who wants to participate with music or a testimony or a children's time, use the same contact information and get in touch with us. And we'd love to be able to send you the information on how to be able to do that so that we can continue to include even more folks within the activity of doing worship. Jen and I always talk about that. The word liturgy is called the work of the people. So that's kind of the way that liturgy kind of rolls out, is it's the work of the people. So it should not just be Reverend Jen and I the whole time leading worship, because then it's not the work of the people, it's the work of Sara and Jen. So we want to really involve as many folks into being able to be a part of worshiping God with your voices and your prayers and, your video of a children's time or your video of, meditative reflection, if you want to do that. So just let us know your ideas and your thoughts, and we'd love to see how we could incorporate those in as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been the Ascends at Boston Avenue podcast. Our producer is Alicia Urban. Our theme music was composed and performed by Wyatt Smith. Boston Avenue United Methodist Church is a progressive historic church located in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma. Please check out our social media for more information on what's going on at Boston Avenue UMC and at 13th Street Worship. We can be found on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you.